a cursed Egyptian relic that might have been smuggled on board, a violin that played through the chaos and somehow made it back, and a bag of perfume vials that still carry what was meant to be a pleasant scent, but are now just a reminder of all the hopes and dreams that sank to the bottom of the ocean with the ship. These are some of the most disturbing objects recovered from the Titanic wreck. The Titanic and cursed Egyptian artifacts, two things you probably wouldn't think go together, but for decades there's been this eerie rumor about an ancient Egyptian artifact that was on board the Titanic when it sank. Sometimes called the Unlucky Mummy, it was actually a sarcophagus lid belonging to a priestess of Amun-Ra. Now, officially, the British Museum denies the artifact was ever on the ship, but some of these stories about this mummy actually came from Titanic survivors themselves. The story goes that the sarcophagus lid had caused problems even before the ship set sail. People who came in contact with it were said to have suffered accidents or even died unexpectedly. A wealthy collector, desperate to get rid of the thing, allegedly arranged to have it shipped to America on the Titanic. Even some early researchers and journalists claimed to have seen documentation putting the artifact on the ship's manifest, but that paperwork has mysteriously vanished over time. The wreckage has never turned up a confirmed piece of the lid, but considering how much of the debris field is still untouched, it's not out of the question completely. Wallace Hartley was the band leader on the Titanic, the man who stood on the deck playing music as the ship went down. He and his fellow musicians tried to calm passengers in the chaos by playing music until the end. Hartley didn't survive, but days later his body was found floating in the Atlantic with his violin case still strapped to him. That violin became one of the most haunting relics connected to the disaster. For decades, people weren't even sure it still existed, but in 2006 it suddenly turned up in an attic in England. Tests showed the wood had saltwater damage, and an inscription on the tailpiece confirmed it was a gift from Hartley's fiancée. Scientists even used forensic analysis and CT scans to prove that it wasn't a fake. Today, the violin's been auctioned off for nearly $1 million, but should it have stayed lost? Some believe that items like this, so tied to tragedy, can carry an energy that may not be good to bring into your home. Adolphe Saalfeld was a first-class passenger on the Titanic and a perfume maker. When the ship went down, so did his luggage, including a small black bag carrying dozens of tiny glass perfume vials. They were meant for business meetings in America, where he hoped to sell his latest fragrance blends. The bag was recovered decades later, buried in the mud 2.5 miles beneath the ocean. And you'd think those delicate bottles would have been destroyed, but not only were they intact, the scents were still there. And I just find that kinda eerie. It's easy to forget that the Titanic wasn't just a ship, it was carrying people from all walks of life, all with hopes and dreams. And artifacts like this bring all of that crashing back. Something about that lingering scent, still alive after all these years. It hits harder than some photos or wreckage can. Some conservators and researchers feel uneasy around it too, that there's something off about standing in a room and suddenly smelling something that came from one of the most infamous tragedies in modern history, and I gotta say, I'd have to agree with them. Among the debris pulled from the Titanic's wreck site was something small, almost easy to miss. A child's toy marble. Just a little glass sphere about the size of a thumbnail. When it was found in a leather pouch alongside other personal items, it stopped the recovery team cold. This thing had most likely belonged to a youngster. That just hits different. Scientists believe it may have belonged to a young boy traveling third class, one of the many immigrant families hoping for a new start in America. The marble was slightly worn from use. Maybe it was carried as a comfort object, and the fact that it went down with the ship, then sat undisturbed for nearly a century at the bottom of the Atlantic, man, that is somber. There's a weight that comes with holding something that personal. When recovery teams first found a pair of small shoes near the Titanic wreck, it was pretty creepy. These weren't just scraps of leather. They'd been worn by a child. They'd been sitting on the seafloor for nearly 100 years, and they were still recognizable. They're believed to belong to an unidentified person, possibly the youngest victim ever found, a boy who was pulled from the ocean by a recovery ship and buried in a grave simply marked unknown child. For decades, no one knew who he was, and these shoes became a symbol of every nameless person lost that night. Forensic science eventually identified the boy as Sidney Leslie Goodwin, a boy from England who died along with his entire family. The shoes helped make that connection, but even with a name now, the image of those tiny shoes sitting alone in the mud is something people don't shake off easily. One of the most chilling items recovered from the Titanic wreck was a pocket watch that had stopped at 2:20 a.m., the exact time the ship struck the iceberg. I don't think I need to do much explaining here. That is incredibly unsettling. A grim reminder of the exact moment when everything went into total chaos. Who owned the watch? What were they thinking about right before the hands of that little clock hit 2:20? We'll never know. Another one of the eeriest things pulled from the Titanic's wreck is a life jacket that clearly did not do its job. This particular one came from the body recovery missions, not the wreck itself. After the Titanic went down, ships like the Mackay Bennett were sent out to find the dead. One of the crew, Robert Edwards, picked up this life jacket from a body floating in the Atlantic. It's made of cork and canvas, old school and heavy, still intact to this day. All the ties are still there. The cork is discolored from salt water, but it hasn't broken down. What's unsettling though is that the jacket survived, but whoever was wearing it obviously didn't. Cork floats, but it doesn't save you from freezing water. It doesn't save you from hypothermia. This jacket was supposed to be someone's last hope, and all it ended up doing was keeping their body afloat long enough to be recovered, dead or alive. When researchers recovered a corroded safe from the Titanic's debris field, they were hoping for cash or jewelry, but once the safe was finally opened, what they found wasn't treasure, it was wet, half-melted paper and black sludge. Some of the documents were too far gone to recover, but there were whispers that among them were letters detailing business dealings, passenger information, and private notes that could have had historical importance, but what did survive wasn't the valuable stuff. It was receipts, random letters, odd banking forms, some completely blank. The unsettling part here isn't what was found, it's what wasn't. Something about the safe's contents didn't match the passenger manifest. It's entirely possible that something important was removed for or during the sinking, or that the safe was never what it seemed to begin with. Even now, some wonder, why was this particular safe stored where it was? Why so heavily protected when there was basically nothing inside it? Did someone know it was going down that night and try to bury a secret in 13,000 feet of water? The safe didn't answer any questions. If anything, it just made people ask more. When scientists first studied the Titanic wreck, they were shocked to find that the steel used to construct the ship was a lot more brittle than expected. The ship's hull, which was thought to be incredibly strong, had been compromised by a sulfur impurity in the steel. This made the metal especially fragile in the freezing cold waters of the North Atlantic. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, the impact caused the steel to shatter, tearing open the ship's sides. It wasn't just the iceberg that took down the Titanic, the actual material the ship was built from caused it to rapidly sink. We're all very familiar with this now, but it turned out the ship wasn't as indestructible as everyone thought. The Titanic's designers and engineers thought the ship was practically unsinkable, but this flaw in its construction, which was only apparent once the wreck was discovered, suddenly painted a very different picture. Now, out of all the personal things pulled from the Titanic wreck, one of the most powerful is a letter written by a first-class passenger named Oscar Halverson, an American businessman from Minnesota returning from a trip to Europe with his wife, Mary Alice. He took some time on board to write to his mother, talking about how beautiful the ship was and what life was like on board. The letter was found on his body, pulled from the ocean after the ship went down. The letter should have been destroyed. It was soaked in salt water for days, if not longer. But it survived, mostly intact because it had been tucked away in an oilskin wallet. The cold water helped preserve the ink. So now, over 100 years later, you could still read his words. A man who didn't make it, but his message did. There's something about that just hits hard. This was a personal note, casual, honest, and it makes everything that happened feel more real. That history isn't just a collection of stories from a long time ago, but that there were real people with real lives involved. People just like you and me. With all that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.